Fundamentals of project management. This is a presentation of the project management cycle. The project management life cycle consists of 6 phases. We have at the beginning the initiation phase, our planning, implementing, monitoring, adapting, and at the end our closing phase. Before we go into more detail, I want to make sure that we have an understanding, and then we're going to see the difference between what is a project cycle and then the management cycle. The project cycle usually is a phases of programming, analysis, design, implementation, and evaluation. This is mostly what most donors will use for defining what is the project cycle. Notice too that in this cycle we have different people. We have different teams managing different phases of this project cycle. There may be moments in which the information that goes from one unit or for one person sometimes will take very long periods of time, and sometimes the information will not be able to go back, or there's difficulties. This is what is known as the project cycle, and it's the entire life of a project. For our purposes in our course, we're looking at the project management cycle. And this is the difference. The difference that we have only one person or team responsible for the phases in the project. So they are responsible for the closing, initiation, planning, monitoring, and adapting of the project. Now the project management phases, we identify these 6 phases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Most of the time people identify them as a linear process, meaning that you go from the beginning, you do your work, and then you close the project. We're going to look at this presentation that there is a need between these phases to move in a cyclical phase. Another understanding in project management and the management of these phases is that they occur at different levels of effort. So I have this graph, and I have here my level of effort, and I have my different phases of my project. And you see that they follow this curve, and we have a different level of effort. During initiation, we might have a little bit of effort. Planning requires more work. Most of the work happens during the implementation and monitor of the project, where we have the cycles and subcycles, and then a little bit of effort done during the closing phases. Now these phases are not necessarily clear cut. These boundaries are not necessarily like these are seen there. Let's look at this next graphic. Here you can see that the phases, depending on the type of project, on their level of effort, and in their time, these phases go up and down, and they overlap. This overlap depends on the type of project, the amount of information they have at the beginning, the amount of effort that is needed, how new is the project, the amount of risks. So you have these areas where there are going to be overlaps. What that means is that during planning, you might start doing some work, and that is okay. And then you continue doing your work, and there are going to be still moments where you might do some little planning, some little changes until there is no more planning to do, and then you continue completing your work. Even during the closing phases, before the implementation is completed, there might be some activities of closing that are started, and then they're finalized at the end of the project. And that is normal to happen in most projects, and again, it depends a lot on the type of project that you have. There might be cases where your project has a lot of information, so your initiation phase could be much closer, or there's a lot of risk and uncertainty, and your planning might go even longer and take a lot of time. That could happen. A lot of these projects depend on the phases and their effort. They will overlap, and that is okay. The idea is that we have an understanding of when something continues and how the next phase follows, usually in the management of the cycles. Let's look at each one of these phases. let's look at what happens during the initiation phase. We start the project basically when the contract is approved and the donor is approving and we have access to the funds. There is a definition of governance that is defined by the organization in terms of the roles and responsibilities and the way the decisions are going to be made on the project. When that governance is approved, then the project manager starts defining the project structure, trying to get an idea of and organizing the project. Then starts building the team, making sure that he gets all the right people with the right skills to manage the project. Then goes into the project office, practically is organizing the space, the materials, the computers, the offices, the logistics of the structure that's going to be supporting the project. And then we have a kickoff meeting that includes some key stakeholders who are invited, so everybody has a good understanding of the project, its main objectives, what's going to be doing, and who's going to be doing it. The next phase is our planning phase. The project manager then looks at the contract, looks at all the information, all the designs, and defines a strategy about how they're going to be implementing this project. There is work on organizing the team, making sure that people we have all the right people with all the right skills. And then the project manager and the team start developing all the project plans. And these are the plans that we saw in chapter 2, and they deal with managing the scope, managing our schedule, the time, managing our budget, team management. We have the stakeholder management, risk management. We have all those 9 areas that we need to produce plans. Project manager, then once all those plans are completed, his role is to integrate those plans. And this is important because it's not just having independent plans, they have to be integrated, they have to be coordinated in a way they create synergy in the management of the project. An important step is the approval of these project plans, and most of the time you will get people within the organization that can help you either review it or get your supervisors or senior management, but it's important to have an approval of those plans. The team and the project manager could be working on the plans for a couple of days or even weeks or even months, but having somebody from outside bringing some expertise and bringing some knowledge about those plans can also be very helpful. So once they are approved, the role of the project manager is to communicate those plans to everybody in the organization or even key stakeholders. If they are not approved, then there is a process of going back, reviewing the plans, making sure they are back and integrated and getting the approval once again. This is important that everybody, especially in the organization, understands what are the plans, because there are going to be implications, especially when we're talking about funds that the accounting department or people in charge of finance or procurement understand some of the constraints of the project, understand the schedule of the project, and they are, or even if it's possible, they could be involved in some of those decisions about the scheduling of the key elements of the project. The next phase is the implementation phase. This is where most of the work happens. That means that the team is going to be assigned work. And that work may include doing procurement and also managing contracts that you can have with consultants, service providers, companies, even other NGOs, local NGOs who are going to be contracted for pieces of the work. They are going to be sub-grants. And then the project manager is going to be looking at quality assurance, making sure that all of this work that is being done during implementation phase, that it follows the requirements, it follows the specifications, so that they are able to produce the quality that is required by the project. And this is the major role and responsibility of the project manager. It says that 80% of the time of a project manager is spent in communications. So during implementation, that is one of the roles of the project manager, communicating. And communicating is not only sending reports, but making sure that everybody understands what the project is, communicating with key stakeholders, building the relationships, making sure that people understand what are their objectives, understanding the risks, understanding the work, understanding what is the project, and making sure that everybody everybody follows those directions, follows those plans, and they are able to accomplish the deliverables and the outputs and the results of the project. The next phase, and a very important phase, is the monitoring phase. The project manager receives performance reports. These reports are coming from the various monitoring and evaluation systems that the project may have in place, including the accounting or including the procurement systems. Here, the performance are going to be talking about most of the time about time of the project, the schedule, our budget information in terms of the scope, the team. Those performance reports are going to be then analyzed. On top of that, there's going to be a lot of quality control on all the deliverables that are being produced. There is a constant risk monitoring to see if there is changes in the risks that were initially identified by the project, and there are any changes. There's also team evaluation, and that's something that is important for a project manager to make sure that the team is doing the right job, that they have the skills, that they are able to produce, that they are able to coordinate their work, and that there are good communications within the team. Once that is completed, then the project identifies if there's any need for changes. And if there are no need for changes or anything else, there is the development of the progress reports. And those progress reports usually go to management, they might go even to donors, and even to some key stakeholders that need to have information about the project. The adapting phase happens if there are changes on the variances. And variances means that we initially plan a project that was supposed to do an X amount of work, but we find that it did Y. There is a change. We were supposed to be 50% ahead of the project, and we're only 45%. So if there are changes in the project, then we generate them in the process called change request. And those change requests are first approved, looked at if there is any opportunity, they are valid, that they are relevant to the project. Those go to the process of the change proposal. Usually they are sent because there are going to be implications to the scope, there are going to be implications to the schedule, implications to the budget, and they need to be reviewed. There has to be an analysis on the impact of those changes to those areas of the project. They are approved. Then once the changes are approved, and the project manager then authorizes that all those plans are updated, especially the schedule, the budget, the scope. And once they're updated, then it's a process during adaptation also to capture our lessons learned. And this is something that you're going to see happening during every cycle. It's not something that should happen at the end of the project. Every cycle, every moment that the project stops, looks at the information, at the monitoring, and creates an improvements to the plans, it's an opportunity to capture those lessons. What it's telling us is that we initially had an idea of doing X, but ended up being Y, and we need to make changes, so we go back to the original plans that we have, or to modify the plan. And those are the lessons that we build it. We build it through the life of the project. The last phase is the closing phase. Once we get our evaluation reports, most of the time are going to be internal evaluation reports. The external evaluation reports sometimes happen much later, and if you're lucky, you will be able to have them during the closing of your project, but most of the time they're going to be internal evaluation reports. With that information, the project manager produces the final report that will go to management or will go to the donor. There is the process of closing the contracts, and you work with administration, you work with your procurement unit or your human resources department, making sure that all the contracts that were created for the project are either closed, and if there are any issues there's a process to resolve them. And then we capture or organize our lessons learned. All those little pieces of information that we capture and that we learn on the project, we try to put it into a component that is then easily accessible to other people in the organization, to other projects or future projects that the organization will benefit from. Then we have our administrative closing. That is when we are in the process of making sure that we're closing the offices and that the project probably rented, all the assets that the project had, that they had to be sold or returned or reimbursed back to the donor. There's going to be a lot of work that needs to be coordinated and managed at this place. And then finally, we have the most important phase in the project, which is celebrate. The team, the key stakeholders, beneficiaries, we all come together and we celebrate the success of the project. Hopefully we came to this process and we were able to achieve the goals of the project, and it's a great opportunity for us to celebrate. At the beginning, we mentioned the idea of cyclical, and the idea of cyclical means that it's not a process that happens only once in the lifetime of the project. That cyclical means that during the process and the phases of planning, implementing, monitoring, adapting, they need to happen on a more frequent basis. It could happen after a major milestone. It could happen during a specific periods of time. But the idea is that the more cycles you have, the larger your chances of improving the project and making sure that the project achieves its goals. And the idea is that it's a process of action and reflection. I do an action, I do something, and I do a reflection. What happened? Did we achieve what we intended to do? Was it correct? Was it right? What was the quality? What the beneficiaries are thinking and feeling? And that gives us an opportunity to make changes and to replanning and then go back into another cycle. So we're continuously improving our work within the project in every cycle. Let's look at another diagram that we can see that we can have many cycles during the life of the project. We can have our first cycle in which we go through all those phases, and even we can have a kind of a mini closing phase, and then we go to this next cycle, which could be either a period, a time, or a milestone, and then we complete that cycle, and then we finalize and we go to the last one until we finally complete and we end and close the project. Every cycle is a learning opportunity, and it's also an opportunity to improve the project. No project plan starts perfect, and that is important. They are all built on assumptions, and those assumptions need to be checked with the reality of doing the project. But you have to go back. You have to say something went wrong, something our assumptions or risks have occurred that are forcing us to rethink how we're going to plan and implement this project. So we go back to our plans, and remember, they are all based on assumptions. They are based on estimates, the estimates on time, the estimates on how we organize our work, the way we assign work to the team. All of those are built on assumptions, and those assumptions need to be proved during implementation. We monitor those changes. Without monitoring, we won't be able to have the data, and then we make the adaptations. We make those changes so we can complete the project and be successful. Thank you very much. This has been the presentation on the project management cycle. Thank you.